This is Faith of Our Fathers broadcast with Pastor R.D. Smith.
Changes men, but never changes. And God's truth must keep marching on and on.
Turn in your Bibles to Psalm chapter 8. I want to read this. Brother Bo asked me to read this before he comes. Psalm 8, verse 1. O Lord our God, how excellent is your name in all the earth. You who set your glory above the heavens. Out of the mouth of babes and infants, you have ordained strength because of your enemies, that you may silence the enemy and the avenger. When I consider your heavens, the work of your hands, your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have ordained, what is man that you are mindful of him, and the Son of Man that you visit him? For you have made him a little lower than the angels, and you have crowned him with glory and honor. You have made him to have dominion over the works of your hands, and you have put all things under his feet, all sheep and oxen, even the beasts of the field, the birds of the air, and the fish of the sea, that pass through the paths of the seas. O Lord our God, how excellent is your name in all the earth. Brother Bo, would you come?
What is man? Did you hear that in the song? Did you focus on that? What is man? What is man? Man is a two-legged animal without feathers. Plato must have been quite desperate when he said that. He actually said it. Man is a two-legged animal without feathers. The entire career of the greatest philosopher of the pagan antiquity was devoted to preaching a philosophy of reason. A philosophy that said that man, by his own effort, can achieve knowledge, and can achieve even perfect knowledge if he just stopped, separate himself from the imperfections of his daily life, and just figure out the ideas, the perfect definitions of things as they really are in that ideal world of reason. Not as we see them in the material world where they are imperfect, but if he sees them in that ideal world out there, if he just ascends to that ideal world with his reason, and man can achieve a perfect knowledge. If you limit your knowledge just to your practice and to your perceptions and to your expectations of yourself and the future, you will never acquire knowledge, understanding, and wisdom, thought Plato. But you got to get out of this world. You got to free yourself from your body, from your matter, from your thinking in this world, and just go out there. Plato, in order to teach you to acquire wisdom, would want to take you to his ivory tower that exists about 10 feet above the ground, never touches the ground, never touches the dirty world, to see the things as they really are in that spiritual reality out there. And only then come down to earth and look at stuff and understand what things are, based on those ideal definitions up there. He has a parable of the chained prisoners in a cave. He was explaining how a man who is living in the material world acquires knowledge. And he says, imagine a cave where there are prisoners chained to the ground, sitting with their backs to the entrance of the cave, and they only see shadows from the real world on the wall in front of them. And they hear some voices and some noises in the back, but all they see is shadows on the wall. And he says this is not the way to acquire real knowledge, but this is what everybody does, according to him. But what you need to do is you got to unchain yourself from the chains of this world and ascend with your mind up there. Get out of the cave and see the real world. He believed in the ideal ideas of things. As long as you're bound by this world, you will only see shadows. But man can free himself from the shackles of his body and get his mind up there and see the true spiritual meaning of all things. And Plato thought he had it. And then he was asked, what is man? Uh-oh. I mean, if there is a real ideal definition to everything that defines everything in its very essence, so we can know it as it is, not as the world and our perceptions tell us, then there should be a definition for the most important element of knowledge. Man. Okay, Plato, what's your definition of man? What is man? I mean, man does knowledge. Man acquires knowledge. Man judges knowledge. He uses knowledge. Who cares if we have the perfect idea of what a tree or a stone is? We want to know what man is. Give us the definition of man. Give us the idea of man so that we know exactly what man is, and we'll proceed from there. And the champion of reason, of ideas and divine knowledge that reveals all essence, the true nature of things as they are, the greatest philosopher of the antiquity replied, man is a two-legged animal without feathers. Seriously, Plato? You attained to the highest of knowledge. You're teaching all of us how to reason and learn and become wise and understanding, because we learn from you how to reach up to that world of ideas and things, how they're supposed to be, to their perfect natural state, and that's all you have to say about man? So as humans, as man, we have nothing to separate us from the world around us that defines us as we are, but the number of our legs and the lack of feathers. And then they tell us we as Christians, we mock their faith and their religions and so on. Well, it is ridiculous, isn't it? The greatest philosopher of the pagan world. He must have been quite desperate. He must have thought and thought and thought and thought, trying to think of what exactly his humanistic system of thinking and philosophy should come up with as a definition of man. He must have tried 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 definitions that were a bit more elaborate than that, but they must have all failed. If he was forced to resort to this outright, stupid nonsense. Man is a two-legged animal without feathers, but he did say it. Diogenes, the cynic philosopher, in response, plucked a rooster, paraded it on the marketplace of Athens, crying, "This is Plato's man." Plato agreed that he needed to qualify his definition of man, so he added, with broad, flat nails. Now, cynic comes from the Greek word kynikos, that is dog, and cynics believed that dogs actually had more wisdom than humans, in that they don't abide by the artificial moral standards of man's society, and they do all their natural things, and I'm not going to mention them in detail here, in everyone's view. So that's what Diogenes did. He lived in a big ceramic pot in the marketplace without taking a bath, and again, doing all his natural things in public. He was also known for walking in broad daylight with a lantern in his hands, searching for man. Oh, he's got the same problem now. He's got to find man. And he's serious about it. He's got a lantern in broad daylight, trying to find man. He never found him. He didn't have a definition of him. Plato at least had a definition. Diogenes didn't have a definition. He thought he would know what a man is once he found him. Unlike Plato, who had a pre-made definition of man, Diogenes didn't have a definition of man. He was a dog after all, and a dog walks around without any pre-made intellectual definitions, right? A dog finds something and eats it, whatever it is. But he never found man. Well, there was something wrong with Greek philosophy then. No one could define man. What is man? Aristotle, for example, always the guy who defined everything by social customs and practices, unlike Plato with his intellectualism or Diogenes with his dog-like perceptions, thought that man is defined by his place in the society. He thought slaves and women weren't true humans, because it was the social status that defined man. The problem is, some Greek slave owners started freeing their slaves for money. The question now was, did that legal act create man? I mean, if a slave is not a man, and then you free the slave, and he's now a free man, and he's a man now. So, basically, the greed of the slave owner created a human being. You want to make money, and you create a human being by a legal act. Obviously, the question, what is man, was a little too much for pagan philosophy. And nobody could answer it. A little above their ability to define things. Anyone familiar with those ancient Greeks and their philosophies knows they feared having to answer questions about the true inner nature of man. They avoided those questions like the plague. The most important of all philosophical issues defied any definition by the pagan world. There was no right definition for man. Whatever definition one could come up with turned out to be lacking in some area, wrong in another area, or simply preposterous and absurd. And yet, a definition was necessary. How would you know anything if you don't know yourself, what you are, really? Later on, it became an obsession of the pagan thought during the Renaissance and then the Enlightenment to try to define man as he is. And there were a lot of theories during that time, some occult and mystical, some rationalistic about the true nature of man. Man was defined, for example, by the size and the form of his skull. I'm not kidding you. Nazi Germany is exactly a good example of it. By the supposed fluid in his blood vessels. You know those psychiatrists today, when they talk about phlegmatic, choleric, sanguine type of person, it was believed that you got specific liquid in your blood vessels, so that defines you. By his genes, by his astral aura. By the planets at the time of his birth. There's modern psychoanalysis as well, and the scientific analysis between introvert and extrovert, and so on, everything's supposed to define man as he is. There just has to be some fixed, immutable, unique element in man's nature that we can discern, isolate, analyze, and find out what man really is. There just has to be something. But trying to find that elementary essence of man that reduces him to one element was no different in principle than defining man as a two-legged animal without feathers. Didn't occur, and still doesn't occur, to modern university professors and philosophers. They still don't have the time to realize that they're trying to define the most complex entity in the universe by resorting to grotesque simplification, by reducing man to elements. Then communism stepped in the tray and said, okay, we're going to define man. Marx didn't care so much for defining man. He thought Darwin had it all figured out. He believed in Darwin, and he thought man is simply highly organized matter. See, the only difference between you and that chair is not as well organized. The molecules are not as well organized as you are. That's the only difference between you and the chair on which you're sitting right now. All that matters is your material circumstances. That means the connections between those molecules in you is what matters. That's all. The problem is when the Russian revolutionaries tried to apply Marx in practice, they were suddenly faced with a problem. We need to change man now. See, there's a problem. Man is a little too selfish and greedy and capitalist for us. We need to change man. And our old definition of man, that he is just highly organized matter, doesn't work. We need to come up with a new definition of man. Okay. Now we need to probably he is the material product of his economic forces. We need to change economy. We need to change his economic circumstances, and we'll change him into the new Soviet man that will think only in terms of what's ours, not in terms of what's me and mine. It didn't work. Okay, then they thought, oh, maybe he is the product of millions of years of evolution, and therefore, if we finance enough scientific expeditions to Africa to study those chimpanzees and those gorillas, we'll find out about man. Hundreds of expeditions, Soviet expeditions to Kenya and Uganda and Tanzania to study the gorillas to find out what man is. Can you imagine that? Okay. When it didn't teach them anything about man, they resorted to occultism. In the 80s, the Soviet Union and its satellites, including my own country, Bulgaria, spent exorbitant amounts of government money on studying parapsychology phenomena. From poltergeists to old-fashioned clairvoyance, in the hope that they will discover any clues to the true nature of man as he is. 24 centuries after Plato, there's no answer in the pagan world. Still, the best definition of man boils down to a plucked rooster with broad, flat nails. We still know nothing about man as he is. Man still surprises philosophers and social architects and engineers and politicians. He's still a mysterious entity. Just when they think they figured him out, he turns around and turns the tables on them all the time. Just when they think that 50 million voters surely voted to have socialized health care and will trip over each other to sign up for it, they get only a meager few thousand people that actually signed up for Obamacare. We surely need to start redefining man again. Because he's not acting the way we want him to act. Well, you think surely the Bible has an answer to the question. Why don't we just go to the Bible and ask it, what is man? Okay? The Bible should be able to give us the answer to that very important question that evaded secular philosophers for millennia. That elusive element, that elusive stable particle that defines man, that will give us the insight into man's nature must be there somewhere in the Bible. And you're ready now for the answer. You'll be disappointed, I promise. And indeed, the Bible asks the question in many passages. What is man that you take thought of him? Psalm 8:4. Notice the mood. What is man that you take thought of him? It does ask the question, but it does ask it in a very interesting way. What is man that you magnify him? Job 7:17. What is man that he should be pure? Job 15:14. What is man that you take knowledge of him? Psalm 144:3. What is man that you remember him? Hebrews 2:6. Surely the Bible is concerned with the nature of man if it asks the same question. So where is the answer in the Bible? Now be ready for the biggest surprise you've ever had. It isn't there. There's no answer in the Bible to the question, what is man? At least, there's no answer to the question as the philosophers are asking it. Okay? There's no definition of man. Yes, there is something like a definition. We'll talk about it. It says, in his image, God made man. But how does that help us? We now have to know what God is. And we know we're forbidden from examining God's nature in its comprehensiveness. God is knowable only partially. But he is incomprehensible to man. We cannot comprehend God with our minds. Does that mean we can only know man partially but never comprehensively? Yes. Paul says we only know in part, as in a mirror, dimly. Then he says, then I will know fully, 1 Corinthians 14:12, but then that is when the perfect comes. And let me tell you this, the perfect is not the death of Apostle John. Okay? The perfect is the perfect, that final day when we will see Jesus Christ directly. Meanwhile, what? How do we know what man is? Let me make that clear again. The Bible does not give us the answer to the question, what is man? Notice of all the quotes I gave, the question is never asked in a positive way as if God wants to give you an answer. It is rather a rhetorical question, diminutive, almost derogatory to man. What is man that you should remember him? As if the Bible mocks all the philosophers throughout the ages with their obsession to find that abstract characteristic of man that defines him against everything else. God is mocking them, God is mocking you if you're trying to find out what you are. When you're asking, what am I? And God, yeah, what are you that I would remember you? Centuries of philosophical effort and labors of the highest level, somber discussions, heated debates, ideological wars, books after books and articles, treatises, papers, dissertations, government-subsidized scientific and psychological studies, all designed to give us a clue what man is. And the Bible says, what is man that I should remember him? To all of them. You can almost hear God's laughter in that question. Come on, man. Show me how smart you are. What is man? I mean, what is man that I should remember him? Did you find that magic particle, that magic element, that magic characteristic that made man so important as to spend thousands of years and billions of dollars in trying to find what man is? Did you find it? Or is he still a plucked rooster? So we still don't know what man is. There's no definition in the world outside of us, and in the pagan world, there's no definition in the Bible. Except, of course, that little description. that he is made in the image of God. Which doesn't help us much if we ask the question the wrong way. Because we don't know what God's nature is, and we have no hope of knowing it comprehensively. But it is a start. We can start from there, in the image of God. It must give us a clue, after all. What is it to be in the image of someone that we will never have the hope of knowing comprehensively? Does the text give us some clue? And here we meet the most amazing secret of the Bible. One that has been hidden from so many, even Christian philosophers and theologians and preachers and writers. And the secret is that God refuses to define man abstractly by some stable, stagnant, inner metaphysical quality. That means a quality that's kind of inside man. By some magical particle of man's essence that separates him from everything else and from his place in history. You know, you can define an animal by its genes, even without knowing what the purpose or the relation of that animal is to history and reality. We have no use for dinosaurs today, but we can define a dinosaur by the genes and by the bones, right? You can define a table by the fact that, by its basic qualities, flat surface on 4 legs. That's the definition in the American Heritage Dictionary, for example. An article of furniture supported by 1 or more vertical legs and having a flat horizontal surface. And you know, you look at it and you know it's a table, right? There's a stable, stagnant quality of a table that defines a table. Fixed quality, no matter what its design purpose is. We don't need to know the purpose of a table to tell it's a table. We don't need to know the purpose its designer put in it. He may have made it for the purposes entirely different from what we normally believe a table is for, but we will still call it a table because of what it is. If the carpenter tells you that what he made is not a table but a motor vehicle, your reaction will be not, oh, so it's a motor vehicle. Your reaction will be, you made a table to use for a motor vehicle? But not so with man. When God defines man, he uses not man's nature, but man's purpose. Man's purpose outside of man, man's purpose in God's plan as the foundation of his very definition of man. And let them have dominion. In case you're not convinced that this is more important to God than man's inner nature, consider some of the verses I quoted earlier. What is man? And they lead to statements like this. What is man that you take thought of him, and the Son of Man that you care for him? Yet you have made him a little lower than God, and you crown him with glory and majesty. You make him to rule over the works of your hands. And you have put all things under his feet. What is man? You made him to rule. What is man? Nothing. Dust. And yet something, because he has a purpose. The Bible is the only sacred book out there that is not interested in the nature of man as he is. Abstract, stagnant, isolated from reality and future. If anything, man is dust. Nothing to be considered, remembered, honored, or celebrated. Learn to live with it and get over it. Even his soul is not that important. If human souls were so important to God, as so many modern preachers and evangelists claim, God would have done everything he could to save all of them. In fact, Given modern church theology and its focus on the importance of human soul to God, one wonders, why are they so upset with those who believe in universal salvation for all? It is only a logical consequence of modern church theology. I mean, if God cares so much for the soul of man, for his inner nature, he must know a way to save all of man's souls. But if he doesn't save all, maybe he has different priorities. Just maybe. God looks at man and can't find anything in man that is worth considering, honoring, or even defining. God, who has a definition for everything, refuses to give one for man. The static nature of man, the abstract, is not of any interest to God. Man in the abstract is a dead body in a freezer in the morgue to God. And God is not a God of the morgue. It is the dynamic aspect of man's life. His teleology, that means comes from Greek word from goal, for objective, telos. His purpose, his future, that God uses to define man. It is what God has put in man as impulse, as vision, as goal for the future. Man in God's image is man who conquers, expands, explores, discovers, produces, improves, moves, and changes things. Man's nature has nothing to do with a metaphysical element in man that fixes him in some permanent state of being. Man's nature has everything to do with the purpose for which he is created. Take dominion and rule over God's creation. Why did God save you? You may ask yourself. Why did he save me? And everybody asks that question. Why me, God? He saved you not to be saved. It's the same thing like why the plucked rooster crosses the street. To get to the other side. That's how stupid we are if we say God saved me to be saved. While you certainly profit from God's salvation because you're taken out of darkness into light, from bondage into freedom, from the power of Satan into the kingdom of Christ, to believe that the ultimate goal of God's salvation is you is presumptuousness of the highest degree. God saved you not because your eternal state or your perfection, your justification are the most important thing for him. He saved you because he had work for you. And those who know me know that this is my favorite phrase always. We got work to do. Nothing in you, nothing in your nature, nothing in your metaphysics has any value whatsoever to deserve or warrant salvation. You're only saved because there's a purpose for your life. A future of achieving things for the kingdom of God. Something bigger, greater, worthier than anything you will ever be or hope to be. In the pagan religions, it is man whose nature is fixed and immutable and stable and foundational and worthy to be remembered. This is in the pagan religions. They're all humanistic. It's man who is in the center. Man determines his own name. Man gives names to the things around him. And man gives names to his gods because man has purpose for his gods. You know? He assigns realms to his gods. He assigns their own areas of responsibility where they have to work and prove themselves worthy of his approval. That's what the pagan religions are. Juno, you take the family hearth and the matrimony. Neptune, you take the seas. Apollo takes scientific knowledge and light. Athena, you're responsible for wisdom. Venus, your assigned area of responsibility is love. Now, these little guys, nymphs and satyrs and the wood spirits, each one of you will have a specific geographical place to take care of. Man needs you. So he employs your services, and you will be paid with proper sacrifices and honor and rituals. Fulfill man's purpose for yourselves, and you will be blessed. This is a pagan religion. You know, man is the central point of the universe. He is the stable, immovable, immutable element in it, and your job is to serve him. Meanwhile, man is responsible for discovering who he really is, because that's the center of all. Because you know, discovering who man really is utterly important for the universe and for the gods themselves. The nature of man is the center of all nature. That's why what is man becomes the most important thing ever. But in the Bible, there's one person that has no name. God. Or he has no name that can be recognized, comprehended, or assigned by human beings. He has no purpose given to him from others. He has no responsibility, nor is assigned to follow someone's agenda. He has no job description given to him by man. And it is his nature that is stable, immovable, immutable. It is his nature that is the center of the universe, and he knows the nature of everything, and he gives names to everything. And man is defined by God's purpose and God's agenda and God's commandment to rule over the earth. And nothing else in man matters but this purpose. The question, what is man, is irrelevant, stupid, ridiculous. It is never asked seriously in the Bible, and when it is asked, it's always to mock man, not to really find out the answer. By now you're wondering, why is Bo so worked up about this? Well, yeah, we know man has purpose and a place in God's plan. Yeah, we know that. What's the big deal about it? We know that we don't give God a purpose. He gives us purpose. We know that man was created to do specific things, to take dominion, to rule, etc., etc. Why do we need a whole sermon on the nature of man to tell us that nature of man is not important, and what is important is the purpose of man? Yeah, we know that God's covenant includes perfection only as a means, not as a goal. We're not like those pagans who are so obsessed with the nature of man and place such great emphasis on it. We're not like the Gnostics who believe that the world is a constant battle between the good God and the bad God, and man's concern is only pure spirituality. Just stay spiritually on the good side of the dividing line, focused on inner thoughts, inner perfection, because any real action in changing the real world automatically makes you bad. We don't believe those things. So we're not like those people, or aren't we? Let's see. For the last 100 years, we have had churches whose main concern has been not with obedience to the law of God, not with obedience to the dominion mandate, not with obedience to the purpose of God for mankind in history, but with pure spirituality. We have abrogated the law. We have abrogated the Great Commission. We have abrogated the Dominion Covenant. We have abrogated any real practical charge, commission, commandment, or purpose God has for mankind and for each one of us individually. We have replaced obedience with spirituality. And that spirituality we have defined not as the Bible defines it. Because the Bible defines the spiritual man as one who judges all things in terms of an absolute, ethical, practical standard. 1 Corinthians 2:15. And not as serving God's purpose for our generation. Acts 13:36. Our spirituality has been introspective, navel-gazing, self-absorbed, almost a cult spirituality. We have focused on perfecting ourselves, building in ourselves all kinds of beautiful but largely unused and unusable qualities. We had a holiness movement. designed to make us holy, independently of our cultural and economic and political and any other kind of practical involvement. Anybody remembers the holiness movement? We had a discipleship movement, and we continue to give empty talk about discipleship, and the only purpose of that discipleship is to create that perfect character in us that won't ever be applied to real work. Because our job as disciples is to line up at the bus stop to heaven and wait. Oh, and bring other people to that bus stop as well. We have seminary after seminary offering all kinds of obscure and irrelevant courses, and nothing about purpose and work and taking over the world for Christ. Those graduating from those seminaries are masters and doctors in emotional fits of how wretched a worm I am before the Lord, and how much I long for His return to take me home. This art of pious self-depreciation, this is what's produced in our seminaries today. The art of pious self-depreciation. And it has reached heights far superior to anything that church has had in history before. I guess in previous centuries, the church was too busy conquering the world to worry about that art. We have another art as well, writing long and longer articles on irrelevant topics related to man's obscure inner feelings. And it also has its golden age in our time. You know what an expert is, according to the Murphy's Law. An expert is somebody who knows more and more about less and less until they know everything about nothing. This is what's produced in our seminaries today. They write longer and longer articles on fewer and fewer topics until one day they will write an infinite number of words on nothing. Just read what comes out of our Reformed seminaries these days. Just try to go through some of the papers to get exposed to nonsense squared. Conferences are discussing tough questions Christians face. Tough, I mean like, did Jesus really have to die? Doctors of theology discuss questions like, how do I deal with guilt and shame when I wake up in the morning? These are real topics of real conferences, Reformed conferences, and real doctors of theology talked on these topics. My response is, I was in a little, theologically, completely destitute Pentecostal church back in Bulgaria where there's no seminaries. In the first 2 weeks, I had an answer, a very good biblical answer to the question, did Jesus really have to die? And I didn't have a single doctor of theology around me to make a conference on that. But we have it in the States. We do leadership conferences to produce leaders, and then we have no direction where they can lead others to because we have no purpose for them, and we have no purpose for ourselves. We have no purpose for the church as a whole, other than just keep ourselves from being polluted by the world. Our kids come to church because they have to come to church, because this is what good Christian kids do, and they're good Christian kids, therefore they have to come to church because they're good Christian kids and they need to remain good Christian kids. But beyond that, they have no purpose for it. Even in the homeschool movement, where we should know better, we teach our kids to be perfect, pure, modest, and obedient, of course, but not in the sense of obedient to the call of God for their lives. Obedient, rather, in the sense of responding to whatever happens to them, whatever the world brings against them. We have produced, even as homeschoolers in this country, and I'm what some people call a homeschool jihadist. I just don't acknowledge any other way of teaching kids, but with their parents. And yet, I know the problems of that same movement. We have produced a whole generation of passive kids, even in the homeschool movement. Perfectly obedient, proper, socialized, modest, pure, service-oriented, but passive. Kids without purpose, except to wait for what God is going to bring in their lives. The last generation of homeschoolers in the U.S. has produced the best system of education ever known to man. We're just excelling everything. Everybody in history. Not best in the ideal sense, but only relative to everybody else, of course. Only to produce good Gnostic kids who keep themselves on the right side of the line, but not good Christian kids who are out there to turn the world upside down. Because they have no purpose. Because we didn't teach them that zeal that is burning in their hearts to rebuild the world. If we ever send them to college, it's not because we have a purpose for them, a professional purpose in the Dominion Covenant. We just send them to witness for Christ. We go to work not to fulfill that Dominion Covenant, but to be preachy and to annoy everyone with words that have no meaning, because we have lost meaning for our lives on this earth. We have no goal, no purpose beyond our little souls, beyond our mystical spirituality and holiness and perfection. We have marginalized ourselves by losing the vision of the kingdom of God and our place in it. A proactive place in it. And then we wonder why we're being marginalized in our culture by the unbelievers. We're too focused on man. And let me take this back. We're entirely focused on man. And his perfection, his salvation, his holiness, his purity, his spirituality, all apart from purpose, goal, future, apart from everything that defines man biblically. A purpose. We're trying to fix man in an abstract state, isolated from the world, isolated from history, isolated from the covenant of God, which operates in the world and in history. There's no such thing as covenant outside of history. And in this, we're no better than Plato. Our religion is the religion of a plucked rooster, not the faith of a ruler of God's creation under God, and certainly not the faith of brothers of the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. It's not going to be easy to change your focus from inner spirituality to external obedience and purpose. We will have to undo almost a century of wrong teachings in our midst, of Gnostic penetration in our churches through our seminaries. We have to undo almost a century of irrelevant and fruitless superstitions, pagan influences, and cultural passivity. It is not going to be easy, but you can make it easy for your kids. Did you hear that? You can make it easy for your kids. If I can look at the eyes of every father and mother in this room, I want to look in the eyes of every father and mother in this room and say, you can make it easy for your kids. When you go back home, when you have your devotions, turn to your kids and tell them, what is your purpose here on this earth? What do you believe God has called you to do? To change the world and make it a different place. You, son, are defined by what God has for you as purpose and meaning. You have your own corner of the creation to till and protect. What is that corner, son? What are you supposed to do with it? How is the world going to be different when one day you depart to join me up there with the Lord? What is going to make the world different because of you and what you've done? Are you called to be an engineer or a scientist or an entrepreneur? Do you have 160 acres to conquer? You got to answer, my son. Or you got to have an answer until you're 21. Before you're 21. Or even before that. Aim high, son, for gravity always pulls the bullet down once it gets out of that barrel. And boy, we have a lot of gravity in us. So aim high. But whether you hit the high target or not, you better have a target. You better have a purpose. Because otherwise, you're a useless servant with no definition of himself at all. And you know what happens to useless servants who are too perfect to put their talent to work? What is man? Is the wrong question. What is man created to do is the right question. And what are you personally created to do and achieve and innovate and explore and dress and increase and serve is the crucial question for you and for each one of your children. And we better start asking it in the context of the Dominion Covenant and the Great Commission before it's too late for our generation. And may God give us the grace that we do that.